Okay. Okay. Let's go on. Okay, so the session that we're getting ready to go into, and ladies, listen, you can relax for the rest of the night, man, because I'm going to be talking to husbands. And if you ladies are okay with that, say woohoo. Okay. Fellas, I am not going to ask you that when I get to that. I do not like men going woohoo. Though I've done it twice in the last 15 seconds. All right. Okay. So turn to that next section in your notes, if you would. And I want to, as we get started in this session, I want to call your attention to what I believe is a monumental verse. A verse that I don't think has gotten on a lot of men's radar, but it is an absolute must. The verse is 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. What this verse is talking about is some of the responsibilities that God has given us as husbands toward our wives. And he comes down to the end of the verse and he gives to us a solemn warning, man. And the warning God gives to us reveals, I believe, just how important it is to God that we as husbands fulfill the responsibilities that he has given to us. Because God says this in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them, that is your wife, according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife, as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life. Wow. We'll talk about that in a little bit, man. What incredible terminology for this marriage thing, y'all. We are heirs together of the grace of life. But here comes that crazy warning. He comes to the end and he says, fellas, I want you to do this. That your prayers be not hindered. You ever seen that before, fellas? Wow. And what God is trying to say to us, and I put this in your notes, we can't be developing, go on to the next one. The verse teaches us we cannot be developing our relationship with Christ if we're not fulfilling our responsibilities to our wife. And I hope you have ears to hear that, fellas. Our relationship with Christ, in large part, is determined by us fulfilling the responsibilities that we have to our wife. You see, our relationship with God isn't really much different than the relationship that we have with our wife. It's developed, I'm talking about our relationship with God now, it's developed through communication. And this is probably, so trite that you may not even have ears to hear it, but God speaks to us through His Word, the Bible, and we speak to God through our words. And we call that prayer. Mm-hmm. And what God is trying to say to us in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, fellas, is husbands, do what I'm telling you to do is your responsibility toward your wife, because if you don't, it'll have a direct impact on your relationship with me. Mm-hmm. And the impact that it will have is it will hinder our communication. Mm-hmm. When you pray, it's going to be hindered. And I gotta tell you, fellas, in all of my years of ministry, I see this last part of 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, I see this as one of, if not the biggest problems that men have in their relationship with God. And the way that it shakes out in real life is this, man. You'll see a guy, and again, I can't tell you how many through the years that I've seen. Here's this guy, and whether it be a retreat or a conference, a sermon, whatever, for some reason, man, a guy will, this is it, man, and he'll get so serious with God, and man, he'll want to get into the Word of God. He's wanting to pray. He wants to be discipled, and what you'll see with this guy is it's like he can only go so far. And it's like something is hindering him. He just can't seem to break free. Can't seem to just soar spiritually. And most of the time, I believe the reason that he can't is because he's focused on trying to get his Bible study and his prayer life and discipleship and all of that going, and he treats his wife like trash.
That's good. Amen.
And he thinks that, he's pleasing God with all of this, and God is saying, what's that you say? I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Yeah. That's good.
Just this last, let's see, a week ago Tuesday. Okay, this pastor friend that I have, he's, maybe somewhere along the way this weekend I'll talk to you about what I do in Malawi, but Malawi, Africa, and that's a good portion of what I do. And your pastor is coming in just a couple of weeks there, but a guy that has been several times and is way involved in what we're doing in Malawi. He's got a 16-year-old son, and again, a week ago Tuesday, his son, who's a wrestler, stud, goes to school, and first hour, man, he just collapses on the floor. He can't move, so they call 911 and take him to the hospital, and they start running tests and find out that he's got stage 4 testicle cancer that has spread to his lungs, his brain, and throughout his blood, just out of nowhere. And oh man, such a precious kid. And I thought he was precious before he got sick. Everybody's precious when they're sick. But I thought this kid was a stallion before he even got sick. And the way that he has used this for the glory of God, I'm like, oh my word, man, I want to be him when I grow up. And so, I've been in communication with his dad. And one of the texts that he sent me early on in this thing is, I'm finding that one of the key reasons to be holy is so that you're on praying ground when you have a need like this.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. It's good.
Okay, fellas. At what point in your life do you want to be where you don't give a rip whether God is going to listen to you when you pray? Because I will tell you this, God has a way of humbling us men. When you find out your 16-year-old teenager has got a 40% chance to live, out of nowhere, man, you want to be on praying ground. Or if that's one of your grandkids and all of that. And God is saying, fellas, you better take seriously the responsibilities that I am giving to you with your wife, because if you don't do that, it will hinder your relationship with me, because the relationship is built on communication, and your prayers will be hindered. And so, fellas, I feel like I would be doing a disservice to you before we got into some of these responsibilities to not tell you this incredible warning that God puts behind this thing. Okay, so let's get into this. Okay, so before we got married, before we said I do, wow, things were awesome. But it gets a little bit rougher after you say I do. Okay, and so the way that I've built this for our retreat is two key things wives desperately need after you say I do. Okay, number one is this. After you say I do, your wife desperately needs your love. And I know that you're probably going, duh. I spent $25 and tell me that? Are you kidding me, dude? Okay. And that's it. Yeah, see ya. Okay, no, I listen, when God tells you that, we might need to just make sure we understand.
Amen.
What he's talking about that. Okay. And this is the specific reason that God tells us in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25. Husbands, okay, and like we talked about earlier, when we see that, we got to look like, he's saying, hey, Mark, David, Billy, Derek, okay. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. And what I hope to be able to communicate to you this afternoon, and what I hope you're able to see here, is that our wives desperately need for us to love them like he is saying here in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25. And listen, this is no small little love that he's talking about. He's comparing it to the love that Christ has for the church. And do you know why God gave that illustration and put that kind of emphasis on that? It's because God is the one that created your wife, and he knows what she desperately needs because he's the one that created her. And listen, from the very beginning, God put in her heart a passionate desire to be loved, listen fellas, unconditionally.
Amen.
By her husband, by the man in her life. And I want to say to you this afternoon that to the degree that you learn to love her like that, you will know blessedness. And to the degree that you fail to apply this and learn this, you will be under the domination of that curse that we talked about in the first session. But I want you to see that this whole Ephesians 5 thing, I want you to see that this is actually a very interesting passage. Because, he commands us to love our wives in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25. And the way that he qualifies that is we're to love her with a love like Christ had for the church. And then he describes that kind of love in the other verses, and then he brings it down to the last verse in the chapter. Okay, this is what I'm calling in your notes the most important verse in the Bible concerning marriage.